Hello, welcome to the Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. I'm Natalia Shpilova-Said, and thank you so much for attending our talk today. Our speaker is Dr. Oksana Chabanyuk, and she presents on participation of American specialists in the early industrialization of Eastern Ukraine during the first five-year plans, 1928-1937. Dr. Oksana Chabanyuk is an associate professor of architecture, head of MA in architecture and urban planning program at Kharkiv National University of Civil Engineering and Architecture. Her research was recently supported by Fulbright Program when she became a Fulbright Visiting Scholar 2019-2020 at the University of Michigan. Oksana Chabanyuk has participated in international competitions, programs, workshops, including exchange study at Coventry University, UK, visiting teachers program at the AA School of Architecture, London, visiting research at the University of Lisbon, visiting staff at the Dublin Institute of Technology, and Lublin University of Technology. Oksana Chabanyuk also participated in international conferences, roundtables, visiting lectures and seminars in Germany, Portugal, Austria, Poland, UK, USA, and Ukraine. As always, we will start with the lecture. Please submit your comments and questions via our Q&A option, which you can see at the bottom of the screen. All questions and comments will be addressed during our discussion. If you would like to ask your questions directly, please let me know by putting a comment in the chat or in our Q&A box, and I will promote you to the panelist status and you will be able to participate in our discussion. At this point, I would like to welcome Oksana, and thank you so much again for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Natalia. I'm very pleased to participate in the lecture series that the Ukrainian Studies Organization is hosting me today. And I would like to share with my research with part of my results of the stage that I'm now. And to introduce you the talk about the contribution of American specialists in the early industrialization of Eastern Ukraine during the first five-year plans. In the beginning, I would like to explain or to introduce a few words about how I have came to this topic. My specialization during many years was the industrialized housing and prefabricated housing in the Soviet Union and post-socialist housing, what problems are appearing in the living environment in the post-socialist cities. But studying the deeper roots of historical backgrounds, how the prefabrication and industrialization came and started to develop before the war period, during the 30s, I came to very interesting questions, which actually were of big interest to me. Actually, this information that I came across during the studies of the background was the transfer of industrialization to the USSR. And the transfer, actually, it was unknown for many researchers and people in the Soviet Union because this information was suddenly disappeared from the resources and from publications and from newspapers after the war. And the period of time that actually was describing how the contribution of technologies and how contribution and transfer of technologies was made from abroad was mainly in the period of the 1930s. So the transfer of industrial knowledge from the USA to the USSR during the first five-year plan remains to be assessed and analyzed within early Soviet history. Now, at that moment, the reason for this transfer was the lack of experience of construction of huge industrial plants in the early USSR and the tasks of rapid growth of industry during the 1928-1932 required the involvement of foreign specialists, as they were bringing not only the technology, but also the field of engineering, how to construct, how to produce, and what actually is developed and produced abroad. And the specialists were coming from the USA, Germany, the Netherlands, and other countries. The foreigners who came to work in the USSR numbered about 80,000 people, of which 20 to 30,000 worked in industry. They contributed to rapid construction of heavy industry plants in eastern Ukraine as part of first five-year plan. And that territory, those places included Donbas basin, that's Makivka and Horlivka, in Zaporizhia, the construction of Dnipro HES hydropower station, also the objects in Dnipropetrovsk, now it's Dnipro, and Kharkiv. In my talk, I will focus on the contribution of American specialists to industry from 1920s to 1930s in Eastern Ukraine. As I told in the beginning, that the publications the Soviet publications had the gap after the war. That's the gap of 40 years in which the role of American specialists in early Soviet industrialization is absent. The scientific debate about the involvement of foreign specialists, especially from the USA and Germany, later from Germany, in the industry of Eastern Ukraine, actually, it has now many difficulties to the resources and to archives, and those difficulties are very multi-layered, and I will explain few reasons why those difficulties appear. First, it's the lost and transported archives in Ukraine. According to the National Register of Lost and Displaced Archives, the archives of Ukraine were partially removed during the World War II and transported to Germany, Romania, Czech Republic, and Poland. In addition, 25% of documents were lost during the wartime. At the same moment, some of the organizations which were producing design projects, state design institutes on the territory of Ukraine at that time, they were the branches of the main state design institutes which were situated in Moscow. So most of the archives also were transferred during their work to Moscow, but also many difficulties now appear about the fact that the firms and design institutes were often changing their names, so they were merging with other institutions, design institutions, or they were closing and new design institutions appeared. So this difficult transfer of organizations also influenced that it's difficult to trace where the archives later, in what archives later appeared the documents. Also inaccessible archives. Now, the archives in Lugansk and Donetsk, Makivka and Gorlivka are currently inaccessible because of the occupied territories in eastern Ukraine after the Russian aggression. And the fact of occupied territories doesn't allow us to be sure that the documents are properly saved in the archives. And the next reason is the lack of clear and open information on the territory of post-Soviet Ukraine. We still find in up-to-date publications in Ukraine that very little information about foreign specialists who were working in institutions in Eastern Ukraine. Very small amount of information appear, and this lack of clear and open information about work, contribution, and innovation which was brought to the development of industry appears, for instance, in such quotes as engineers didn't make a big influence on the development of engineering school, end of quote. This quote is from the contemporary book that describes the history of the organization that designs industrial plants connected with coal now, and it is still working in Kharkiv, for instance. If we look back on local Ukrainian periodicals and professional publications on that time, the involvement of foreign specialists in industry and urban planning, it was widely described, but the professional literature not always had the references to the American instruments or structural elements or plants or built plants. At the end of the 1930s, the Soviet regime announced that the contribution of foreign specialists to the industrialization of the USSR was no longer needed. Information about the involvement of foreign specialists simply disappeared from Soviet publications during 1940s, 1980s. So this gap of 40 years of publications in the USSR about the work of foreign specialists and American specialists in particular in early Soviet industrialization crucially devalued their contribution to the rapid development of heavy industrial construction of new plants. And in this place, I also would like to mention that the scale and the quantity of contribution to the USSR as the territory, as big territory was very wide. For instance, I will point such cities as Magnitogorsk, Leninsk, Prokopievsk, Novokuznetsk, Kemerovo. But Eastern Ukraine also received the part of this huge construction and involvement. In this point, allow me to share with the presentation with my illustrations, which will help to explain all the contribution to Eastern Ukraine. So how this connection and contribution, the contact was developing. The USSR at that in 1925 decided to organize its organization, so-called Amtor, in the USA. And they were actually dealing with the finding the technical resources, technical information, what was produced, what firms, what services are delivering in construction and industry, and they were finding the firms for signing the contracts. So contracts between Soviet contractor Amtor and American manufacturers and engineers companies which were signed during 1928, 1930s. This list was big. I only picked it up the places which are situated in Ukraine. And it's Hugh Cooper and Company, New York, consulting engineers for construction of Dnipro hydroelectric power plant in Zaporizhia, Ukraine. Goodman Manufacturing Company, Chicago, Illinois, technical assistance in manufacture of coal cutting equipment in Donetsk, Ukraine. Oglebay Norton Company, Cleveland, Ohio, technical assistance in design, construction, and operation of iron mines near Kryvyi Rih in southern Ukraine. Roberts Schaffer Company, Chicago, Illinois, technical assistance of mine construction for coal industry in the Donbass Basin. Stuart James Cook Incorporation, New York, technical assistance for modernization of coal mines in Donbass in Ukraine, Don Ugel, that was situated in Kharkiv. And those names I will tell in more details about part, not all of those names of the firms during my presentation. Also, big technical assistance was delivered by an electric company, International General Electric Company in the to the USA as technical assistance, but also they were involved in technical information and assistance, supply of generators and other equipment to Dnipro HES in Zaporizhia, Ukraine, technical assistance in design and construction of one of the huge industrial plants, HEMS, turbine works in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and assistance in the manufacture of modern insulating materials in Kharkiv insulation factory in 1930s. I would like to mention also that not all of those companies, not all of this information is studied up to date to this moment, but the parts of the information appear in different sources, in publications abroad, and also the scientists from the US. In addition, part of my examples will be connected with one of the most famous architect, Albert Kahn, architect which was designing the industrial plants, the industrial factories in the US. And he was working in the beginning of the 20th century in Detroit. Among his main famous plants were the projects for Ford Assembly Plant, Packard Motor Car Company, Willow Run. So the scale of all those factories and projects were really very, very huge. But he was also involved not only in the design of industrial buildings, but also private houses and office houses and office buildings and hospitals. So different spheres of public services and construction in the cities. So Albert Kahn's firm, numerous projects in Ukraine included Ford shops in Dnipro, also in Kharkiv, foundries in Dnipro, former Dnipropetrovsk, also in Kharkiv and Luhansk. So those are some of the parts of now existing huge plants, but we will look on one of them, Kharkiv tractor plant, in more details during the presentation. In Kharkiv tractor plant, also where the part of his project was involved, and different sources say about the involvement of his engineers. As well, some of his projects were not constructed, for instance, airplane parts and accessories planted in Kramatorsk. Albert Kahn architects and engineers in Detroit, Michigan, performed consulting services in industrial construction for Kharkiv tractor plant as well. And the whole complete list of the projects by Albert Kahn firm on the whole territory of the USSR, the total amount is about 500 projects. This quantity is very impressive, and it question marked me a lot. What is meant by 500 projects? Is it 500 factories? Is it 500 plants of heavy industry? Because it's really, really a very huge amount. So the sources which I studied, they mentioned similarly different amounts, but like 521, 531, and so on. But not all of, none of them really explained what was in the list. I was, during my Fulbright project in University of Michigan, I was working a lot in the Bentley Historical Library, where the archives, the collection of Albert Kahn archives is preserved. And I was getting acquainted with the list of all his projects, during all the work. And there are not 500 projects for the USSR. So there are ideas also expressed by scientists, and also during my communication with Albert Kahn Associates, because the firm is still working in Detroit, and they continue to do the designs. So this, as I came to the decision or idea that this amount of 500 probably included the amounts which were designed by the branch of Albert Kahn firm that was opened in Moscow. And I will also tell a few words later about this participation, because the engineers and architects went to work in this office. But the main contract, the contract that had to explain what exact tasks received the firm, what exact list of projects they were doing, the contract for this work, this actually very few information from the original sources about the possibility to study this contract, and very few information. But the next part of my talk, I will present about how this technical information was one of the routes of transfer of technical information from the USA to the USSR. So the USSR contractor Amtorg that was working in the firm that was working in New York, one of the tasks, except of the signing the contracts between the countries, between the firms, were to gather the information what was produced in the USA. For this information, this slide first. For this information, the Amtorg published monthly catalogs. Those are the covers of two catalogs, but they were published monthly. American Engineering or American Engineering and Industry. They started to publish in 1925. Firstly, those catalogs or journals were very thin, with some advertisement from the American producers, but later on they were publishing more and more advertisement and contacts about the producers or firms which do designs or technical consultations about industrial construction and construction of heavy industry. For instance, some of the advertisement which I copied from the catalog mentioned, I tried to mark in those red squares, mentioned that, for instance, the turbines produced by Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company for the construction of Dnieprohes hydropower electric station in Zaporizhia, or as I also had in the list in the previous slides, the Stuart James and Cook Company. They were giving the consultations about the design and technical assistance of improvement of coal mines in Institute Don Ugol that is situated in Kharkiv. And here even, so they had kind of, it was not a branch, but many specialists from Stuart James and Cook Incorporated were coming to Don Ugol to Kharkiv, and also specialists and engineers from Kharkiv were going to the USSR to the USA for to gain the experience. And so here also we see that it's situated in Kharkiv. At the similar as Hugh and Cooper company, which were given the consultations for construction of Dnieprohes in Zaporizhia. So they were stating that they are designing, financing, or constructing or managing hydroelectric stations. And so this kind of information was coming through the journals of those catalogs. Oops, sorry. And the main, few examples which I want to introduce in more details. That's the Kharkiv tractor plant and the Dnieprohes in Zaporizhia. So we will start from Kharkiv tractor plant and the involvement of Albert Kahn firm in this construction. So as I told that Albert Kahn was the most famous architect in the US in the industrial design in the design of industrial plants and factories. But at the same time, the contract that was signed with the actual agreement that was signed in 1930, according to this agreement, 25 American architects and engineers came to Moscow. So it was kind of a branch. The Bentley Historical Library in the University of Michigan has the archive documents with the project of this branch of Albert Kahn firm in Moscow. And actually the original project of it. Here in Soviet literature, we cannot see in any sources this information of the building where they were working. What was interesting that the agreement that was signed, the contract, it was a building program amounting $1,900,000,000. It was a very huge amount. It's such a huge amount that it's even difficult to estimate um, uh, what kind of what amount of list of projects or kind of work was involved in this agreement. But Albert Kahn was working also with subcontractors. For instance, they were inviting some other participants to the construction, which also could be involved in this huge contract. So when this team, actually in this photo that was, I received this copy from the Albert Kahn Association from Detroit. Um, uh, this is the team that was departing from New York to Moscow for work. But the sources, the literature in the USSR, in even the journals of that period, they say that it's not the branch of Albert Kahn firm, that this is the so-called Gosprekstroj 1, is the State Design and Construction Institute. But at the same time, the aim of this institute was to absorb and spread the experience, the American experience among the about the construction and organization of the work. And there were in the beginning around 1,000 employees in all chapters. They also had small divisions later in Kharkiv, Kiev, Dnipro, and Odessa. Albert Kahn started to design the, actually this team started to design the projects, but the first projects were designed in Detroit, in Albert Kahn firm for the USSR. Why I want to mention some of the projects which were designed for the USSR is that they are very connected with the Kharkiv tractor plant. So it is the tractor plant in Stalingrad. So here on the left of the screen, you can see the plan that is the plan of Stalingrad tractor plant. And the Kharkiv tractor plant had, this is the contemporary view of the plant. But if to see in the details, you can notice that the copy, the mirrored copy, yes, of the project is present here. So this is the part that was constructed in the 30s. Well, it was constructed more shops, more industrial shops here on the site, but this part that was involved in this part was involved Albert Kahn firm and also his engineers in the construction. What was interesting fact about Stalingrad tractor plant, that it was constructed from metal constructions, and all of them were brought from the USA to the construction site. There were many reasons for that. First of all, it was not enough this kind of material metal constructions that which could be found on the territory of the USSR at the time. So it was a very huge decision to bring all the elements, metal elements, to the USSR, to the construction site, and to assemble actually the plant on the site. Why I'm telling this information about the materials, because this is the connection with the construction of the Kharkiv tractor plant in those assembly shops, foundry shop especially on the site. So in Kharkiv tractor plant was constructed not from metal structures, not from metal elements, because it was difficult to find on the territory the production such amount of needed elements of metal at the time. So the decision was to change the main material to the concrete. and it was constructed with the same, approximately the same measurements, with the same plan, um, but with the concrete constructions. Why the huge industrialization and industrial plants, industrial factories are appearing in Kharkiv? Kharkiv at that moment was the actually the new construction. It was the center for new construction, for the science, as it has, and it has now the oldest Karazin University, and Kharkiv was also the first capital of Ukraine at that moment. Here on the screen, you can see those are two main buildings on the biggest square in Europe that were constructed in the 30s, the House of Projects and the House of State Industry, so-called the Держпром. And at that, again, at that moment, it was the largest office building in Europe. The construction and development was not only in the sphere of office buildings, but huge construction in industry. So as I mentioned, the engineers from Albert Kahn Associates were involved in the construction in the construction of Kharkiv tractor plant. What are the interesting facts about this participation? So one of the main engineers that was involved in the construction was Leon Svazhan. There are not so many photos of him. This photo I found it's not taken on the territory of Ukraine. It's taken in Chelyabinsk, but in this photo, this man is the Leon Svazhan, and very rare archival documents here have the information with his name. One of those, this is the part of the letter that explained the work of foreign workers and engineers on the site, on the construction site. But what is interesting that it is stamped secret, no subject to announcement. So it was not possible, of course, to access a certain period of time. Of course, it was not allowed at that moment, especially to spread this letter. But what interesting information it states. That there were 5 foreign specialists at that moment on the Kharkiv tractor plant, among them Leon Svazhan. But it was not mentioned that he was the engineer of Albert Kahn Associates. He was hired as the head of construction department in the organization Khartraktorstroy. It means Kharkiv Tractor Construction. And he was a full-time employee. But here, this document explains his remarks or attitude about the problems, how he explains the problems with the construction. I will not tell about all of the problems that he mentioned, but one of it that Svazhan particularly stressed the lack of workers, which negatively influenced construction progress. Slow construction left the tractor factory incomplete in fall 1931, despite the 1929 was the promise of organization UkrSO, Ukrainian State Design Institute of Metallurgic Plants. So he also stated about the lack of materials and so on. But also the letter gives the information that the Kharkiv tractor plant was waiting for the arrival of the large quantity of foreigners in April 1930, and it had to be put off this arrival for another 5 months as the housing for the guests was not ready. So the foreign specialists were typically, which were coming, were heads or vice heads of the department. So Albert Kahn Associates, they had a list of specialists, head of departments, which were involved for the certain part of the construction or design. An engineer or group of engineers from Kharkiv would be assigned to the foreign specialists for training, and would also be added the interpreter for this group. But many issues arose during the translation, because the Soviet trainees did not have the high level of proficiency in technical foreign languages. These types of problems that occurred on site were certainly not made known by the public at that time. So secret documents, right? At the same time, not only the American specialists were coming to the USSR, but Soviet engineers also traveled to the USA to gain experience to use in the USSR industry in early 30s. Rare archival documents. I have here 2 documents. That's the cover and the first page of the document, but it also has a very interesting statements here in the beginning. The reports, so those are 2 reports of the working trips. The reports of this kind had restricted access when they were issued. The cover pages read, dissemination not allowed. Data from this report are forbidden to be referenced in the media. Do not give the report to the foreign specialists. Obtain confirmation letter from the workers that they will act accordingly to the above rules. So the engineers from the USSR were going to the USA, to different industrial plants and companies. They studied the technology and equipment in the plants, the producers, the laboratories, and for instance, electrical stations. And they later presented a very detailed reports about their working trips. Also, the second report that has the same restrictions about the access and dissemination of the information, but it explains the working trips and the information about the suppliers of Ford plant. For instance, in Western Auto Screw and Machine in Ohio, Cleveland Cap Screw Company in Cleveland, Ohio, and many more. So they were studying the management, they were given their attitude to the management in those reports, and they are very, very technical. Yes, so I will not not tell a lot in details. They're very technical about the information which they were studied. The next example that I mentioned in the beginning of my talk, the construction of Dnipro HES in Zaporizhia and the involvement of the technical assistance for the construction that was given by the Hugh Cooper of Cooper and Company. This construction was involved 63,000 local workers on the site, when the construction was finished, the administration waited for Cooper's arrival from the US to confirm that the power station could start to work. So it was and actually the one of the main facts that also influenced on the date of the start. But he was involved in technical assistance during the whole construction, and the source for the also states that the first big project that the General Electrics as well undertook was equipping the power plant with the generators. I showed the advertisement from the catalogs. Yes, so also that the Newport, they also were, the firm was also supplying the turbines. As I was explaining about the structure of the catalogs of the information and the advertisement, here on those pictures from the source Soviet Russia through the eyes of an American motion picture film from 1926, 1930s, from Hoover Institution, Charles Stewart collection, we can see the heavy machinery that was used for the construction. And here the advertisement from this catalog, American Engineering, published by Amtorg. Not only the catalogs with technical information depicted the process. For instance, the American company Sanderson that was producing the heavy machinery for the construction appeared even in Soviet children's literature in 1935. And that was this is an old edition that has actually this mention. But what is interesting that the mention of the presence of company Sanderson was removed from this poem by Marshak, was removed in later edition in 1977. So this is actually the gap, yes, from after the war till the end of 80s, the gap that actually excludes the information about the participation of foreign specialists. Who works has to eat. So the also those pictures, there are the copies from the source from the film Soviet Russia through the eyes of the American. So there's the canteen for workers that was built according to the American models of this kind of canteens, but the equipment that was used for the cooking, it was all brought from the US to for this process in the kitchen. The American specialists which were involved in the construction of Dnipro HES, they were living in the building of foreign consultants of Dniprobud. Dniprobud is the organization, construction of Dnipro hydropower station in Zaporizhia. So there were apartment houses and they had actually this kind of living, but not only this. Very interesting fact that there was built, so now it's so-called American Village. It's used, this name in Zaporizhia, and it's also possible to find some postcards which also have this those one family houses in Zaporizhia where American specialists were living. But the film also has the information about this American village. It doesn't say that it's an American village. It says that this is the American community, and it says that the houses were built by Americans for American specialists. The information who built those houses here in Ukraine in archives is absent, even if to communicate with the researchers from Zaporizhia. And the children were playing American games in the American community, and they had, according to the film, American schools and the American church, and their own schools and churches. Well, this fact for me is not proved from the resources from the archives in Ukraine. I haven't found this information, but the houses are still staying. Not all of them, not all of the American village has remained, but people are changing the houses, and the city council of Zaporizhia is not sure how to preserve the examples of the houses, as they have been privatized and were not listed as architectural heritage. There is not any information about in archives in Zaporizhia who built the houses and who authored the master plan for this settlement. But the owners are rebuilding the houses themselves. And the last slide is with the drawings of the Kharkiv plant HAMS, Kharkiv turbine works. Well, actually, the drawings were made after the war because no drawings were left from the original drawings where it was constructed in the 30s. But there is the information in the American sources that it was designed together with the American engineers in Schenectady in New York, New York, for the construction of HAMS turbine works in Kharkiv. And now I will stop my presentation. As the small conclusion that the forgotten history of Eastern Ukraine's foreign technical visitors has left a significant gap in our knowledge, thus the widening of research data from the original resources of the institutions and foreign archives are important and needed for the investigation and dissemination of a more accurate history. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Oksana. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And at this point, we're ready to proceed to our discussion, to our questions. Please post them. Or again, as I mentioned earlier, you can let me know and I can promote you to the panelist status and you will be able to speak with Oksana Chabanyuk directly. So while we're waiting for our questions, I have this immediate question about the years that you're covering. And you showed two documents that went directly from 1930 to 1935. Then we have the Holodomor years. Do you have any documents that were produced during the Holodomor years? And did you look into those particular years? Did they change? Did they differ in any way from the previous ones, or some mentionings probably of the Holodomor?
Well, actually, I do not have in this presentation any cover of this connection, but studying this information, of course, I posed to myself many questions as well, actually, I do not find the connections between those huge constructions and Holodomor in other researchers. As to look, for instance, to the amounts which were spent for the construction in the cities, and of course we know about the set time of Holodomor. So what questions I was posting to myself, that from what resources the USSR was taking those amounts? These amounts, were they taken from the sale of the grain in the market, in the foreign markets, to receive gold in order to pay all of those, not only in Ukraine but the whole USSR, all those constructions? And of course, well, I had some discussions in the symposium where I participated in October 2019 in the University of Michigan about this question. And the organizers, they were also having the ideas that yes, it it had to be connected, because the amounts and the huge constructions, but at the same time the lack of food, later. Also in Zaporizhia, for instance, when I was communicated in one of the conferences, also with organizers, they were telling that many workers were coming from the villages to the construction sites in Zaporizhia, to the construction of Dnipro HES, because of the food, because they didn't have, the possibilities, and for some of them was the main reason. But so those are the answers.
Those are for further research. Thank you, Oksana. We have a question from Hiraki Koromiya. Thank you for a very interesting talk. One question: have you had access to the Amtorg archive, or do you know anyone who has? Amtorg served as an industrial espionage organ as well as an unofficial organ of recruiting potential spies, and that's why I suspect the Amtorg archive seems to be unavailable. Are there any documents in the SBU archive on Amtorg?
I cannot tell much information about the documents about Amtorg. I was trying to communicate with the organization that is literally the same, almost the same name. It is working now, even in New York. Are they the next where they opened as the next organization after that old Amtorg, or what is the aim, or what is the scope, and where the archives of the previous organizations, so Amtorg. I was searching for the contracts which Amtorg was signing. For me, it's a very interesting information should be, but I didn't find by now the exact place of the contracts signed by Amtorg. The information that from the question that this organization had also this kind of not service but work as spying, right? So I also heard some information about this kind of work by Amtorg, that it was kind of two faces of the organization. And at the same time, the head of Amtorg, Bron, that was pointed as the head, well, he had a very difficult, a very sad history when he returned to the USA, because USA didn't want him to continue to work, and actually this sad story was connected with his life, but well, I'm still in research. It's a very, for me, it's a topic, a research that appeared from a certain stage of my research. I didn't know a lot about this period and participation, and what I have found that the information is very, very like in small amounts in different places. So contracts of Amtorg is still in search. Only some, for instance, the contract for a Kharkiv tractor plant, I know that it is in archive in Moscow. Of course, there should be other information in Moscow in archives, but for us now, it's absolutely impossible to, to go to Moscow and to work in the archive in the in the contemporary situation in Ukraine, with the difficult relations which are between, between Ukraine and Russia because of Russian aggression and so on. So um, it's difficult to answer to your question, but it's very important question, very important.
I was trying to look through the documents that you were sharing with us, and the one which was also not designed for public dissemination. It was some sort of a comment on the living conditions of the foreigners in the USSR, and it does sound like spies reports or agents reports, because those are comments on whether foreigners have any complaints or how satisfied they are with the living conditions, or how satisfied they are with the groceries and other products, if they have any special requests. So those do sound like someone is presenting just some information which is not supposed to be public, as well as the second document, and this time it was a report from the Soviet participants of these projects in the USA, where they give a very detailed report on what they saw and how their life was there. And I'm thinking about the situation when someone from the Soviet Union goes to the USA to get some experience, and I would imagine they would have some memoirs, or they would have some memories, or they would like to share some experiences, but I would imagine that we don't have those documents, we don't have those interviews, probably because, again, they probably had to go through some background check, and they had to sign some documents promising that they won't disseminate any kind of information.
Supposedly yes, because it's if the main document about the work was so restricted, so of course we can only imagine that the other restrictions were on the place about other talks or memoirs. Mm-hmm. Well, there are, on the contrary part of the internet or the foreign specialists which were coming to the USSR, they were going back and they were writing the reports and some memories about their participations, and not only the from the USA, but also, for instance, the scientists from the UK, which were coming to Kharkiv, to one of the scientific institution, and those sources they actually are not fully accessible from here, even mm-hmm. to read, even if they are in the libraries, because such literature was not coming to the USSR, of course, but at the same time, well, it's still very difficult to identify the place where some documents are. And this difficulty is here, and also the similar difficulty is in the US that I experienced, because when you are working with the archive documents, you have, for instance, the funding aid, the bulk and the collection of the documents, and the descriptions of the boxes. But in the descriptions, it appears, for instance, Russia, but in the box between the documents, you find Kharkiv. Mm-hmm. So it's also very, for me, it was not easy to identify what kind of information I have to search. Well, actually, I had the task, but I didn't imagine those difficulties. The same is here when you come to the archive. Not always it is written in the description of the profile the details that there may be this kind of letter about foreign specialists which were working on the construction, because it's only one in the box, one letter in the box, or one letter in the collection. It is not mentioned. Many archives still have the difficulties also to connect those old organizations, because it's very difficult to trace the changing of the names and how they are connected. Where, so it's actually not very researched. It researched in very small amounts, and it's difficult to find. It's difficult to find.
Yeah, the comment that you just made was actually one of my questions, because we had a chance to talk just a couple of days ago, and you mentioned that you were surprised that Ukraine wasn't actually mentioned in those documents as Ukraine. It was either Russia or the USSR in the best case. And yes, as you just described, it creates some additional difficulties in terms of research today. But I also think that it contributes to this construction of narrative about Ukraine, how it was seen, perceived in the 20s or in the 30s, where this political entity, territory as Ukraine wasn't seen internationally at all. And I would again assume that the foreigners that would come to Kharkiv, for example, or to Zaporizhia, they would say that they are going to Russia, but not to Ukraine.
Maybe not now. If they are coming to Kharkiv, they know that it's Ukraine. If they come,
I mean in the 20s or in the 30s.
In the 20s. I'm not sure how to answer what they were thinking about. The most advertisement was addressed to from the USSR, you know. So you also can find those narratives about Russia as no, but about the view on the part of eastern Ukraine as Russian River Dnieper, for instance, and it is in the book. Well, I'm not sure how how did they think at that moment, but the whole advertisement was from the side of the USSR. In some rare places it might be mentioned Ukraine, but not Ukrainian Socialist Republic, Soviet Socialist Republic. Yes, yeah, like Ukraine, but it's also not mostly as USSR, yes, or Russia, and then you find the particular information, and that's that not the territory.
You also shared that you had some conversations with the residents in Kharkiv, and you were asking if they knew that, in fact, foreigners came to this city to build some buildings or some plants. And in response, you would hear something, no, not at all. We constructed all this, we built all this. I guess this comment is connected with this question about what kind of Soviet narrative was created and was propagated. And according to the official ideology, Soviet men and women could build new society metaphorically and literally, but according to your presentation, it's quite misleading. And I think your presentation to some extent subverts this kind of statement.
Of course, the ideology was built to persuade every citizen of the USSR that only they built. I think, but the people which I was communicated with, they were answering like, no, only we built. Probably they also have the they can answer like this because the information was not so spread about the transfer of technologies or transfer of technical construction and so on. well, the information was absolutely excluded from, from all the courses of history, or if you even take the huge volumes of history of Ukraine, of Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. It's about every region, like 25 volumes. You will not have any kind of this information there as well, that was published during the USSR time. Um, but um, if now we can have at least to some part, to access some part of the information, of course we have to study to know this, and it's it's actually it's up to people how do they can um, build their attitude to this information. They spend most of their life in this ideology, so they may have the right to answer like this. Um, but well, this is the reality.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Oksana. I really believe that this kind of presentations is a very interesting intervention into our history, also in our ideologies that were propagated back then. I'm also thinking about the visits of other American writers. For example, Theodore Dreiser came to the Soviet Union in the end of the 20s, and he also went to the Donbass area, but he also calls the Donbass area Russia. And there was a lot of tension between the two countries back then. However, it does look like the Soviets were trying to establish, maybe not to establish some connections, but at least to use, right, the expertise of the foreigners to build the country, to maybe rebuild the country as well. But this kind of relationships, this kind of relations was not quite public. It was quite discreet. You mentioned that there is a gap. I also believe that there is some silence in terms of how these relations were discussed or negotiated even before that gap that you described happened after the 1940s. So again, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and thank you for guiding us through this almost invisible part of history. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much also for hosting me today. And of course, I'm very pleased to share with the research and especially with the part of research that I was involved in my Fulbright project. And also I still continue, and I will be continuing because there are still many question marks in this field.
Thank you, Oksana. Today, we spoke with Oksana Chabanyuk, who talked about participation of American specialists in the early industrialization of Eastern Ukraine during the first 5-year plans 1928-1937. Thank you again for attending our lecture. Information about upcoming events will be posted on the UkrSO listserv and on our Facebook page, Ukrainian Studies Organization at Indiana University. You can view our previous lectures and talks on our YouTube channel. And for future recorded events, please subscribe to our channel. Again, thank you so much for joining us for our talk today.